The night before the wedding should have been silent, sacred, untouched. But the Sunfire Court had never understood mercy, and Seraphina had never known peace inside its gilded walls. Her golden bedroom, perched high in the east wing of Sunfire Castle, trembled as if the stone itself sensed what was coming. Outside, ceremonial lanterns burned along the marble balconies, casting soft halos over guards in polished armor. They believed they were protecting a future queen. They believed nothing could reach her here. They were wrong. The golden doors exploded inward without warning, not splintering so much as disintegrating under a wave of pure, suffocating shadow magic. The light in the corridor died instantly, swallowed as though a great beast had taken a single breath. Smoke poured into the chamber in thick coils, dragging the warmth out with it. Seraphina jolted upright in her silk-lined bed, her auburn hair spilling over her shoulders like liquid fire. For one fractured second, she thought it was a dream, the kind she had learned to survive by pretending not to feel. Then she saw them. Her guards were already falling. Not fighting. Falling. Dark silhouettes moved through them with impossible precision, each motion silent and absolute. Blades of condensed shadow flickered in and out of existence, not metal, but something far worse, something that obeyed thought rather than physics. A man stepped through the smoke as if it belonged to him. Darius. Even before her mind fully named him, her body understood. The air itself changed around him, thickening, dimming, bending towards something ancient and predatory. He was towering, carved from raw strength and brutality, his 6'5" frame wrapped in dark iron armor that seemed to drink the light. A single smirk curved his mouth, not warm, not amused, but victorious, as though the outcome had already been decided long before he arrived. A guard lunged at him from the side. Darius did not even turn. One flick of his fingers and the man was lifted off his feet by invisible force, slammed into the far wall with a sickening crack. Another tried to raise a spear. Shadow coiled around the weapon and snapped it like dry wood before piercing the man's chest. No hesitation. No wasted motion. Only inevitability. Seraphina's breath caught, her hands gripping the bed frame as she forced herself to stand. She was not weak, not in the way they thought. The Sunfire Court had taken enough from her already. She would not be taken without resistance. "Stop!" she commanded, her voice shaking only slightly. Darius finally looked at her. The moment his gaze locked onto hers, something in the room tightened, like a noose pulled gently, but deliberately. His eyes were a storm of dark silver and void black shadows, ancient and unreadable. For a fraction of a second, something flickered there. Recognition. Interest. Or perhaps calculation. Then the smirk returned, sharper. "Princess Seraphina," he said, her name rolling off his tongue like a verdict. "Still breathing. Good." She stepped back as he moved closer, every guard between them now either unconscious or gone still. The smoke parted obediently around him. The castle, her prison, her supposed sanctuary, had already surrendered to his presence. "You're trespassing in Sunfire Castle," she said, forcing steel into her voice. "Leave now, or you will die here." That earned a quiet, almost amused exhale from him. "Die?" he repeated, as if the concept was quaint. "No, little son, I didn't come to die." He lifted his hand. The remaining guards at the doorway collapsed instantly, their bodies dropping as though their strings had been cut. Seraphina flinched despite herself. "I came to collect what was stolen from me." Before she could react, shadow erupted behind her. Cold arms like living smoke wrapped around her waist and lifted her effortlessly from the ground. She struggled immediately, kicking, twisting, fury igniting through fear. "Let me go!" Her heel struck his armored side, but it was like hitting stone. He did not even grunt. Darius adjusted her over his shoulder as if she weighed nothing. The world tilted violently, her vision upside down as she saw her chamber recede, her broken guards, her shattered doors. From below, a voice rang out, trembling with authority and rage. "Darius of the Shadow Keep." Her father, King Aldrich, stood at the balcony entrance, flanked by elite Sunfire mages. "Release my daughter immediately." For the first time, Darius paused. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head upward. Seraphina could see her father now, pale but furious, wrapped in ceremonial gold robes that suddenly looked fragile against the encroaching darkness. Darius's voice carried effortlessly through the chamber, calm and absolute. "This kingdom dressed a cage in gold and called it protection." His grip on Seraphina tightened just slightly. "You hid her behind walls and called her yours." The mages began to chant, light gathering in their palms. Darius did not move. "She is not yours," he continued. "Not anymore." The air cracked. In an instant, every mage collapsed. Their light snuffed out as shadow pressure crushed their magic mid-incantation. King Aldrich staggered back as invisible force pinned him in place, forcing him to watch. Darius leaned slightly, so his voice would carry only to the king. "Your most precious treasure," he said softly, "is now my spoil of war." Then he turned and stepped off the balcony. Seraphina barely had time to scream before wind tore at her skin. Darius leapt with impossible force, not falling but commanding the air itself. A massive dark-winged beast emerged from the void below, its leathery wings spanning the night sky, scales glinting like obsidian glass. He landed, on its back, with her still slung over his shoulder. The creature roared, and they were gone. The Sunfire Castle shrank behind them, a glowing wound in the distance, swallowed by mountains and then by endless night. The air grew colder with each beat of the beast's wings, biting through her thin white nightgown until she shivered violently. Seraphina twisted again, desperation rising. "You cannot do this!" she shouted into the wind. I am not a thing to be taken." Darius did not answer immediately. His hand tightened briefly on her waist, steadying her as the beast banked sharply through a cloud bank. The sky was a void of ice and starlight, vast and merciless. "You are alive," he said at last, voice low. "That is enough for now." The journey stretched into silence broken only by wind and the beating of wings. Seraphina's struggles slowly weakened, not from submission, but from exhaustion and shock. The world she knew had ended in minutes. Then it happened. A sudden jolt as the beast shifted altitude threw her against Darius's armored shoulder. Her neck scraped sharply against a jagged edge of dark iron plating. Pain flared, and a single bead of blood surfaced where her skin broke. It should have meant nothing, but the moment it touched the air, everything changed. Darius froze. Completely. The beast faltered mid-flight for half a second, as if sensing its rider's stillness. Seraphina felt it too, an invisible pressure snapping into place, like the world had inhaled and refused to exhale. The scent of her blood drifted. Sweet, impossible. Not like Sunfire magic, not like anything he had ever known. It struck him with physical force, ripping through restraint, through reason, through centuries of control. His pupils contracted sharply. A sound tore through his mind, not spoken, but roared from something far deeper than thought. Mate. The word shattered something in him. For a fraction of a second, Darius's grip loosened. Seraphina felt it immediately, her breath catching as she turned her head slightly, confusion replacing rage. "What?" she whispered. Darius's jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might break bone. His entire body had gone rigid, every muscle locked in brutal discipline, as if holding back something vast and violent. His inner instincts surged, demanding, claiming, reacting to the bond he had not sought and could not deny. But when he spoke, his voice was still controlled, almost cruel in its steadiness. "No," he said sharply, as if rejecting the word itself. "Stay quiet." The beast continued its flight, but the air around them had changed forever. Something primal had awakened, coiling beneath his skin, recognizing her as his in a way no oath, no war, no hatred could undo. And Darius, the villain alpha of the Shadowkeep, did the only thing he could do. He buried it. Deep, hard, violently. By the time they reached the Shadow Keep, a fortress carved into black cliffs under a sky that never fully brightened, his expression had returned to its carved, merciless calm. But the tension in his hand never left her waist. He carried her through towering obsidian gates, where shadows bowed like living things. Servants did not meet his eyes. Guards stepped aside without command. The keep itself seemed to recognize its master returning altered. He did not take her to a cell. He took her to the highest tower chamber. The doors opened into a room of cold stone, wide windows, and an endless view of jagged mountains beneath a frozen sky. He finally set her down there, releasing her with controlled precision. Seraphina stumbled slightly, catching herself against the stone wall. Her breath was uneven, her body trembling from cold, adrenaline, and shock. Darius stood at the threshold for a moment longer than necessary. The shadow in him still stirred, still whispered. He shut the door behind him with a final, echoing sound that sealed her inside the highest tower of the Shadow Keep, and though his face remained unreadable as he turned away, something far more dangerous than cruelty had already begun to take root beneath his silence. Because he had heard it. And worse than that, he had felt it answer. The Shadow Keep did not sleep. It never truly had. The fortress lived like a wounded god carved into black stone, breathing through cracks of ancient magic and cold wind that howled through its spires. High in the tallest tower, Seraphina lay alone in a chamber meant for containment, not comfort. Yet even the keep itself seemed unsettled by what it now held. The cold was the first thing that broke her. It seeped through the stone floor, through the narrow windows, through the thin fabric of her torn white nightgown. At first, she tried to endure it the way she had endured everything else in Sunfire Castle, silently, rigidly, refusing to give her body permission to collapse. But the exhaustion from the kidnapping, the shock of the mating bond, and the lingering burn of fear had already weakened her defenses. By the time the fever took hold, it did so like a conquering army. Heat rose through her veins in violent waves, clashing against the freezing air until her body no longer knew what it was meant to be. She curled into herself in the corner of the tower chamber, shaking so violently her teeth clicked together. Sweat dampened her skin, turning the thin fabric to a second layer she could not escape, while her auburn hair stuck to her cheeks in tangled strands. Her emerald eyes fluttered open and closed without focus. The world tilted between burning and freezing. Somewhere far below, the Shadow Keep continued its existence, as if she were not screaming in silence. Darius felt it before he understood it. He stood in the lower hall of the keep, unmoving, as though carved from the same obsidian that formed its walls. Servants passed quickly around him, careful not to draw attention, careful not to breathe too loudly. A healer waited at the edge of the corridor, hands clasped tightly, sensing the volatility in his presence. Something was wrong. Not in the keep. In her. The realization struck him like an insult he could not ignore. He had left her in the tower hours ago, contained, secured, alive. That should have been enough. It had always been enough before. But now there was a pressure in his chest he could not classify. Not rage, not hunger, not strategy. Something far more dangerous. Anxiety. It irritated him immediately. Darius did not do anxiety. He turned sharply, shadow flickering at his feet like a living extension of his will. "You," he said to the healer without looking at them fully. "Up!" The healer hesitated only once before obeying. They climbed the tower steps in tense silence, the air growing colder with each level. The Shadow Keep responded to its master's shifting mood. Shadows stretching longer along the walls, as if listening, as if anticipating violence. By the time they reached the top chamber, the door was already slightly warped from pressure that had built around it. Darius stopped. He did not knock. He listened. Nothing. No sound. That silence was worse than screaming. The door exploded inward under a single strike of his hand. Stone cracked. Iron hinges snapped. The chamber filled instantly with cold air and darker presence as he stepped inside. "Seraphina," he said sharply. No response. The healer stepped in behind him, trembling. Then Darius saw her. In the far corner of the room, half hidden by shadow, she was curled into herself like something broken and discarded. Her body shook uncontrollably. Her skin was flushed and pale at the same time, sweat glistening along her collarbone. Her lips were parted slightly, but no words came out, only uneven breaths that sounded too fragile to belong in his fortress. For the first time since he had become Shadow Alpha, something inside him misfired. Not calculation, not dominance, recognition of vulnerability. He crossed the room in 3 strides and crouched before her. "Look at me!" he ordered, her eyes barely focused. They flickered toward him, unfixed, lost in fever haze. The healer stepped forward cautiously. "My lord, she is burning up. The exposure her body is rejecting the strain. We need to cool her down and administer salves for fever suppression." Darius did not answer. His gaze remained locked on her trembling form. Something in him tightened further, dangerously so. "Fix it," he said. The healer moved quickly, reaching for their satchel. "I need access to her back to apply the cooling paste and trace the burn points." Darius did not hesitate. He reached forward, gripping the back of Seraphina's nightgown. The fabric was soaked through with sweat, fragile, sticking to her skin. Without gentleness, without thought for delicacy, he tore it open. The sound of ripping cloth echoed in the chamber like a fracture. Seraphina flinched weakly, but did not have the strength to resist. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the healer stopped breathing. Darius froze, because what he saw was not what he expected. He had expected softness, royal purity, the untouched perfection of a Sunfire princess sheltered in gold. Instead, her back told a different truth. Whip scars crossed her skin in overlapping layers, old and new, some pale and healed. Others still darkened as though magic had burned them into permanence. There were marks that looked like binding sigils, cruel imprints of restraint magic designed not to kill but to control. Burn scars twisted across her shoulder blades in uneven patterns, as if someone had pressed raw magical flame directly into her flesh and held it there until it left memory behind. It was not damage from war. It was repetition. It was routine. It was ownership. Darius did not move. The healer made a small, choked sound behind him. "No," they whispered without meaning to. But Darius heard nothing anymore, except the sudden roar in his blood. The world shifted. The temperature in the room dropped violently, frost crawling across stone surfaces in jagged patterns. The candles along the walls extinguished one by one as if the light itself was being strangled. Shadows thickened, expanding outward from Darius's body in violent waves, slamming into furniture, cracking wood, shattering glass vials in the healer's satchel. The healer stumbled back, nearly falling. Darius rose slowly. His breathing changed first, controlled, then uneven, then dangerously still. "Who?" he said quietly. The word barely existed. Seraphina's fevered eyes fluttered as she felt the shift in him. Something primal in her recognized danger, even through haze. She tried to turn slightly, but pain and exhaustion pinned her. Darius's hands clenched. "Who did this?" he repeated, voice lower now, shaking at the edges. "To you!" The shadows erupted. Not outwardly random, not chaotic, targeted, furniture lifted from the ground and disintegrated mid-air. The healer cried out as they were thrown backward by force alone, slamming into the wall, but not breaking, only pinned by pressure that did not allow escape. The stone floor cracked beneath Darius's feet as if afraid of his weight. His eyes lifted, and they were no longer silver. They were glowing red. Not metaphorically, not faintly. Deep, burning, unrestrained crimson that looked less like light and more like a wound in reality itself. Seraphina's breath hitched. Even in fever, even in collapse, she felt it. This was not the villain she had been taken by. This was something worse. Something breaking. Darius stepped closer to her, and the shadows around him moved like a living storm, shredding anything that dared remain intact. He knelt again, but not in control now, not in calculated dominance, in something raw. His hands came down, gripping her shoulders carefully, as though afraid she might disappear if he held too hard. The contrast was devastating. The same hands that had slaughtered guards without hesitation, now trembling against her fevered skin. "Look at me," he said again. But this time it was not an order. It was a plea sharpened into violence. Seraphina's eyes finally met his, and what she saw there shattered something in her. Not cruelty, not hunger, not possession. Devotion, unfiltered, terrifying, absolute. His voice broke as he spoke again. "Who did this to you?" he roared suddenly, the sound ripping through the chamber, shaking stone. "Tell me their names." The shadows surged again, reacting to his fury, coiling upward like beasts ready to devour the world. "I will burn their entire kingdom to ash," he continued, voice fracturing into something feral, something ancient. "I will erase every throne that allowed this. I will tear their bloodline from existence. No crown, no mercy, no memory." The healer made a small sound of horror, but could not move. Darius leaned closer, forehead nearly touching Seraphina's. His grip tightened just slightly on her shoulders, grounding himself in her existence as if she was the only anchor preventing him from becoming catastrophe. "Who touched you like this?" he whispered now, voice shaking in a way that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with restraint. "Who dared to turn you into this?" Seraphina's lips parted. She could not answer, not because she would not, because for the first time in her life, someone was asking not what she had done wrong, but what had been done to her. Her vision blurred further, but she did not look away. And in that fragile silence, Darius's expression shifted again. Something in his rage twisted into something more unbearable. Pain. He understood war. He understood death, but he did not understand this kind of harm inflicted slowly, repeatedly, behind closed doors where no one came to stop it. His hand trembled against her shoulder. "Seraphina," he said her name like it hurt, like it cost him something. "Tell me." Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a breath. "I don't remember all their names," she whispered. That was enough. The shadows exploded outward. The chamber cracked under the force of his restraint, finally failing. Darius let out a sound that was not human, not entirely wolf, something between grief and destruction held together by sheer will. And then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the storm halted. He froze. His hands remained on her shoulders, but his voice dropped into something quieter, deadlier. "Then I will find them anyway," he said. A pause, "and they will learn what it means to hurt what is mine." The words should have terrified her. Instead, through fever and pain, Seraphina felt something she had never known before. Safety. And the monster holding her looked at her as though she was the only thing in the world keeping him from becoming the end of it. High above the jagged black cliffs, where the wind never softened and the sky always carried the weight of distant storms, Seraphina began to learn that captivity could have different shapes. In the days after the fever broke, she expected chains. She expected interrogation. She expected punishment for what she had seen in Darius's eyes when his control shattered. Instead, she woke in a chamber that had changed without her noticing when it happened. The stone walls of the highest tower in Shadow Keep were still cold, still ancient, but something inside them had been softened, as though the fortress itself had adjusted to her presence. The bed beneath her was no longer bare. Thick, impossibly soft furs layered over the stone like snow that had chosen warmth instead of death. The air smelled faintly of crushed herbs and distant firewood, not the sterile cold she remembered. And always, without exception, he was there. Darius never entered loudly. He did not need to. He arrived like pressure in the air, like gravity shifting. Even when she did not see him immediately, she felt him first. The shadows along the corners of the room straightened when he came near, as if the world itself had learned reverence. He did not treat her like a prisoner anymore. He treated her like something breakable, something sacred. On the first morning after her fever, she woke to find him kneeling beside her bed. Not standing, not watching from a distance. Kneeling. A man built like war itself, 6 feet and 5 inches of muscle and shadow-forged armor, lowered to the stone floor as though it was the only appropriate place for him to be. His head was slightly bowed, dark hair falling forward, the cruel edges of his reputation absent from his expression. In his hands was a bowl of warm water and herbs. Seraphina froze. He noticed immediately. "You are awake," he said quietly. It was not a statement of surprise. It was acknowledgement, as if her consciousness had been something he had been waiting for. She pushed herself up slightly, the furs slipping down her shoulders. "What are you doing?" A pause. A flicker of something almost uncertain crossed his face. "Fixing what they broke," he answered. Then, before she could respond, he set the bowl down and reached for her. Seraphina tensed instinctively, but he did not grab her. Instead, he moved with infuriating precision, careful in a way that did not match the monster she had seen tear through Sunfire guards. He gently turned her so her back faced him. The same back that had been revealed in rage and horror. The same scars that had shattered something inside him. "I will not hurt you," he said, voice lower now. "Not ever again." Then his hands lifted slightly, and shadow magic bloomed. But it was not the violent darkness she remembered from the kidnapping. It was warm. It moved like liquid night softened by embers, flowing across her skin with painstaking control. Where it touched her old wounds, heat followed, not burning, but mending. The sensation made her inhale sharply, her fingers gripping the furs beneath her. Darius did not rush. He moved as if every scar was a sentence he refused to misread. His fingertips occasionally brushed her skin, steadying the flow of magic, guiding it with absolute focus. And when he reached the deeper marks, the old whip scars carved into memory rather than flesh, his breath changed. Just slightly, like something in him was breaking again, but this time in silence. Without warning, she felt his lips pressed gently against her shoulder blade. Not hunger, not ownership, reverence. A kiss so careful it almost hurt more than the scars themselves, because it carried something she had never been given by anyone in Sunfire Court. Devotion without condition. "I should have been faster," he said quietly against her skin. Seraphina turned her head slightly, confused. "Faster for what?" His hands paused for half a heartbeat. "Before they did this," he said. The words were simple, but the meaning inside them was not. He continued healing her without waiting for permission to continue speaking. "I thought Sunfire Court was just corrupt," he said. "Now I know it is worse than that. It is organized cruelty wrapped in gold." Seraphina's throat tightened, but she said nothing. She had lived it too long to argue. When he finished, he did not immediately move away. Instead, he stayed close, still kneeling, as if leaving her would be the greater offense. And then, something changed. The next day, she was no longer alone in the tower. A wounded shadow warrior was brought in, then another, and another. At first, Seraphina thought it was coincidence, or some strange ritual of the keep. But as she watched, confusion shifted into understanding. The Shadow Keep was not empty. It was full of those discarded by the world above. Wolves with broken bonds, mages with burned-out cores, warriors whose names had been erased by courts like hers. They did not bow to Darius in fear. They bowed in respect, not because he demanded it, because he had given them a place to exist. Seraphina stood in the tower doorway, watching as a young warrior with fractured ribs was carried in. Darius did not hesitate. He knelt beside him immediately, shadows forming splints with surgical precision, sealing pain without stripping dignity. No cruelty, no excess, only control. That night, when the keep settled into its uneasy silence, Seraphina asked the question that had been building inside her for days. "Why do they trust you?" Darius glanced at her from across the chamber. "They don't trust me," he said simply. A pause. They trust that I do not lie about my intentions." Seraphina frowned. "And what are your intentions?" For the first time, something like hesitation crossed his face. Then honesty. "You." The word landed heavily in the air. Not as possession, as truth too large to disguise. Over the following days, Seraphina changed in ways she did not expect. It started small, a touch of warmth in her hands, a faint response to the lingering magic inside her body that she had never been taught to understand. When she placed her hands over a dying warrior one evening, something inside her responded instinctively. Light. Not sunfire light. Something purer. Something that felt like release instead of control. The wounded man gasped as his wounds began to close. Darius watched from across the room. He did not interrupt. He did not speak. But something in his expression shifted in a way that made every shadow in the room still. Later, when the warrior had been taken away healed, Seraphina stood frozen. "I didn't know I could do that," she whispered. Darius stepped closer. "You were never allowed to learn what you are," he said. That sentence lingered between them longer than silence. From that moment on, something between them changed again. It was no longer just protection. It was recognition. And recognition, in the Shadow Keep, always became dangerous. Because it meant attachment. And attachment meant vulnerability. Darius understood this better than anyone. He simply did not care anymore. One night, the sky above the keep fractured into beauty. Meteor showers streaked across the darkness, silver and violet trails cutting through the endless night like burning messages from forgotten gods. The cliffs outside the tower glowed faintly under their passing light. Seraphina stood on the balcony wrapped in furs, watching in quiet awe. Behind her, she felt him before she heard him. "Beautiful," he said. She turned slightly. "It never looks like this in Sunfire Court," a humorless exhale. "They would call it an omen," he said. "Here, we call it a reminder." "Of what?" "That the world is larger than their throne." Silence settled between them again, but it was different now. Less distance, more tension. Not hostile, alive. Seraphina turned fully to face him. He stood close enough that she could see the faint exhaustion in his eyes, the constant restraint he carried like armor, the monster everyone feared, the man who knelt for her. Without thinking too long, she stepped forward. Darius did not move away. She reached up, fingers brushing the edge of his armor. "You keep saying I belong to you," she said softly. His jaw tightened slightly. "That is not what I said." Her gaze lifted. "Then what did you say?" His silence lasted longer this time. "Finally, that my instincts recognized you before I did." Seraphina's breath slowed. The air between them felt charged, unstable, like the moment before a storm breaks. "I don't want to be taken," she said quietly. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "I know. But I also don't want to be returned," she continued. That made him still completely. Seraphina stepped closer until there was almost no space left between them. "I want to choose," she said. For the first time, Darius looked uncertain. Then, slowly, he lowered his head slightly. "Then choose." The words were not easy for him. They cost him control. Seraphina studied him, the monster who had destroyed a kingdom to take her, who now trembled with restraint in front of her choice. And then she moved. She reached up, pulled him down just slightly by the front of his armor, and kissed him. It was not hesitant. It was not gentle. It was deliberate. Darius froze for half a heartbeat, as if his entire existence had stalled in disbelief. Then something in him snapped, not violently, but inevitability giving way to surrender. His hand came up slowly, not forcing, not taking, but holding her as if she was the only thing anchoring him to sanity. When she pulled back slightly, his forehead rested against hers. The meteor shower continued above them, indifferent to the moment reshaping 2 lives below it. "I should not want you like this," he said quietly. Seraphina's fingers tightened against his armor. "But you do." A pause. "Yes," he admitted. The honesty in it was devastating. Something ancient shifted between them, not visible but absolute, like a thread snapping into place that had always existed just beneath reality. The mating bond, once resisted, now fully recognized. It surged through both of them at once. Darius exhaled sharply, his control fracturing in waves of restrained intensity. Seraphina felt it too. The pull, the connection, the undeniable pull of something deeper than fear or choice. His hand moved to her waist, steadying her. Not claiming, grounding. "Seraphina," he said, voice rougher now. She looked up at him, and for once, neither of them pulled away from what they were becoming. Above them, the sky burned with silent light. Below them, the Shadow Keep held its breath, and between them, something far more permanent than war or kingdom or fear finally took shape. The wind above the cliffs of the Shadow Keep changed first. It did not simply blow harder or colder. It shifted direction as if the world itself had become aware of approaching violence. Far beyond the black horizon, the sky over the lands of Sunfire began to glow with artificial brilliance, a harsh, invasive gold that did not belong to nature. It rolled forward in formation, steady and disciplined, like a wound opening across the land. The army of the Sunfire Court advanced beneath banners of radiant light, their armor engraved with purification sigils and binding runes designed to erase shadow magic entirely. At their center rode King Aldrich, Seraphina's father, his face carved into the mask of righteous fury. They called it salvation. They called it a rescue. But every step they took toward the Shadow Keep was built on the same foundation Seraphina had once lived under: control dressed as love. High within the fortress, Darius felt them before the scouts even returned. He stood in the war chamber of Shadow Keep, the air around him already thickening with pressure. Shadow armor formed around his body in layered segments, each piece locking into place like a living extension of his will. Dark iron plates slid over his shoulders, across his chest, sealing him into something older and far more dangerous than a king's war suit. He did not speak at first. He simply listened to the distance. Then he turned. "They came anyway," he said quietly. No one in the chamber answered. No one needed to. The keep itself had already reacted, shadows crawling up the walls like instincts preparing for slaughter. Darius reached for his blade, a weapon forged not of metal but condensed absence, a weapon that cut not flesh alone, but intention. "I will end this," he said. A pause. Alone. He intended to go alone, because that was what monsters did when they loved something they could not risk losing. He turned toward the gate, and then the doors of the keep opened. Not broken, not forced, opened. Darius stopped. That was not possible. The massive obsidian gates that had held back armies for centuries shifted apart slowly, as if obeying a command not issued by him. Light spilled in. Not sunfire light, something darker, something controlled. And then she appeared. Seraphina. But not the broken princess he had stolen from a gilded cage. She sat astride a massive war beast, its armored hide rippling with shadow-forged plating, its eyes glowing faint ember gold. She wore battle armor shaped from blackened steel and sunfire gold filigree, not ornamental but functional, designed for movement, for war, for dominance. Her auburn hair was braided back tightly, and across her shoulders rested a mantle that looked like the night sky before a storm breaks. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a declaration. Darius's breath stopped for half a second. "Seraphina," he said, low and stunned. Her gaze met his, and she smiled. Not soft, not uncertain, cold, certain. "I'm not staying behind," she said. The war beast beneath her shifted, muscles coiling as if eager. Behind her, the gates of the Shadow Keep closed again, not sealing her in, but sealing them together. Darius stepped forward slowly. "This is not your fight." Her eyes sharpened. "Everything that made me is in that army." Silence. Then something in him shifted. Not resistance, acceptance. He extended his hand. "Then ride with me," he said. She took it without hesitation. And in that moment, something final settled into place between them. Not bond, not destiny, but choice sharpened into unity. Outside the gates, the battlefield stretched beneath a sky fractured by competing powers. The Sunfire army formed into rigid ranks, light magic arrays activating in synchronized brilliance. Shields of radiant energy rose like walls of judgment. At their center, King Aldrich lifted his hand. "Bring her back," he commanded. "She is corrupted by shadow influence. The Shadow Keep will be purified." Seraphina heard it clearly as she rode forward beside Darius. Her father's voice. The same voice that had never asked if she was safe, only whether she was useful. Darius felt her tension immediately. His hand brushed her arm once. Not restraint. Anchor. Then the battlefield erupted. Sunfire mages unleashed coordinated beams of purification light, tearing across the field in straight, merciless lines. Shadow creatures scattered, the ground cracking where light struck. Darius moved first. He shifted. Not partially, not symbolically, completely. His body dissolved into living shadow, reforming into a massive wolf-like beast of pure darkness and crushing presence. The air screamed around him as he surged forward, tearing through the front line before they could adjust. Armor broke. Light shattered. Soldiers fell like ash, but Seraphina did not stay behind. She rose from her war beast and stepped forward into the battlefield alone. The moment she did, the air around her changed. Something inside her, buried for 20 years beneath control and silence, cracked open. Sunfire energy, pure, uncontrolled, overwhelming, not the refined magic of court training. Something raw, something inherited. King Aldrich's eyes widened. "Seraphina, return to formation." She tilted her head slightly and smiled again. "You don't get to command me anymore," she said. Then she raised her hand. Light exploded outward. Not controlled beams. Not structured spells. A wave. A tidal surge of golden-white energy that shattered Sunfire formations instantly. Shields cracked. Binding arrays collapsed. Entire sections of the army were thrown backward as if the ground itself rejected their presence. For the first time, the Sunfire Court realized they were not facing a rescue mission. They were facing her. Across the field, Darius tore through ranks of armored soldiers. He moved like judgment made physical, shadow claws rending through defenses effortlessly. When he reached a cluster of elite warriors, he recognized one immediately. The man who had once overseen her punishments. Her brother. The one whose cruelty had been quieter but more consistent than any other. The man raised his weapon, light blade trembling. "You're just a monster," he spat. Darius did not answer. He did not need to. He struck once. The shadow wolf surged forward, and the arm holding the weapon was torn clean away in a brutal, decisive motion. The scream that followed was cut short as darkness swallowed sound itself. Seraphina felt it. Not joy, not satisfaction. Release. She turned slightly toward Darius, and their eyes met across chaos. Understanding passed between them without words. This was not destruction. This was correction. King Aldrich gathered all remaining light into a single overwhelming array, a golden spear of judgment aimed directly at the Shadow Keep itself. "For the Sunfire Court!" he shouted. Seraphina stepped forward again. "No," she said softly. She lifted both hands, and the light responded to her instead. It bent. It fractured. Then it reversed, collapsing inward upon itself, until the entire array imploded in a silent burst of harmless radiance that fell like fading snow. The king froze. For the first time, there was no authority left in his expression. Only realization. Darius reformed beside Seraphina, shadow smoke coiling off his body. Blood marked his armor, not his own. He looked at her, and for once, there was no rage left in him, only awe. The battlefield fell into fractured silence, not peace, defeat. Sunfire soldiers dropped weapons one by one, unable to maintain formation against what stood before them. Seraphina walked forward until she stood in the center of the field. Her voice carried. Not loud. Absolute. "This is not your kingdom anymore," she said. King Aldrich stepped forward weakly. Seraphina, you are my daughter." She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head once. "No," she said. "I was your possession." A pause. "And I am done being owned." Behind her, Darius approached. He carried something in his hands. A crown. Not gold, not silver. Dark iron, forged in Shadowkeep's deepest forges, etched with binding runes not of control, but recognition. He stopped in front of her. The battlefield watched. Even the wind seemed still. Darius lowered the crown slowly, not forceful, reverent, and placed it upon her head. "I did not steal you," he said quietly. "I broke the cage that was killing you." His hand lingered for a second against the crown. "You are not a captive," he continued. "You are not a weapon." A pause. "You are the queen of the shadows." Silence spread across the battlefield like a verdict. Seraphina closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something in her expression had fully settled. Not anger, not grief, completion. 6 months later, the world no longer spoke of war between Sunfire and Shadow. It spoke of a new balance, a rewritten order. Within the rebuilt halls of Shadowkeep, now no longer feared but respected, Seraphina stood at the center of a throne room transformed. The darkness there was no longer oppressive. It was alive, but calm, like a sleeping force that no longer needed to prove itself. She wore no chains, no restraint, only the crown. Darius stood beside her throne, no longer looming as a conqueror, but present as something far more dangerous to the world outside. Loyalty. Seraphina watched him quietly as he reviewed reports from distant territories, his expression focused but peaceful in a way no one would have believed possible months ago. "You're thinking too loudly," she said. His gaze shifted to her, a faint hint of amusement. "I am not thinking loudly." "You are," she replied. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, he moved. He sat on the edge of her throne, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Not as an alpha asserting dominance, as a man choosing rest. Seraphina leaned slightly into him without hesitation. The world outside could burn, rebuild, or forget. Inside the Shadowkeep, there was only quiet, only shared breath, only the aftermath of a war that had ended with neither death nor defeat, but transformation. Darius's voice was low. "Do you ever regret it?" She looked up at him. "No," she said simply. "I regret what I survived, not what I became." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good," he said. And for the first time in his existence, the villain alpha closed his eyes beside the woman he had once taken from a golden cage and allowed himself to rest. Seraphina remained beside him on the dark throne, not as someone taken, but as someone who had chosen the shadow and made it her own light. If you enjoyed this Villain Gets the Girl romantasy audiobook, please hit the like button and subscribe for more epic stories.